Anyway, you know, speak to my colleagues, go to these conferences like the MUFON conference every once in a while, and seek out people whose opinions that I value. And I find that a lot of them are sort of in the same place that I am in evaluating where we are. The idea that I don't think anybody really knows the answers to this stuff, and anybody who tells you that they do know the answers is full of it. It's possible that maybe our government knows a little bit more because they've got giant storehouses of information that they've never made public, but if they do know, they aren't telling us. A hot topic of the moment, of course, is the discussion of disclosure. We hear it pretty much every day in the UFO field, and the need for disclosure. And, you know, as mentioned in the introduction, I'm a professional journalist. I'm a reporter by trade. To me, the First Amendment is a religion. It's my profession, it's my obsession. I live by it. But I'm not quite sure that this disclosure idea is a good one. And I'm not saying that I would ever work against it. In fact, pretty much everything I do in my life is working toward it. If I found information that needed to be reported to the public, I would certainly report it because that's my job. But when it comes to the subject of tonight's talk and the weirdness surrounding it, I'm really not so sure anymore, and I'll explain that as we go along. You know, I'll always work towards disclosure, but you know, to find out what the insiders know, things like that, but I do stop sometimes to ponder just how smart it might be to have all the secrets, if that's what they really are, come spilling out. You know, I think we feel that we could handle the news, whatever that news might be, but what if? You know, what if the ultimate truth is a lot more complicated than anything we've been conditioned to accept? A lot more mysterious, a lot more confusing, and ultimately threatening. Is that the nature of reality itself is just much more different than anything we can imagine. That we are far more insignificant than we might want to know. That these entities that we call aliens may not really be aliens, that maybe they've been here a lot longer than we have, and maybe we're the ones who are aliens to them. They can see us, they can enter our world at times, but we can't see them or enter their world. That's disturbing stuff. Now, whether or not they want to eat us or harvest our souls or think of us like we're ants, you know, it would be disturbing to learn that we're not alone and that we can't even imagine what these other beings look like. It's heady stuff. And in that sense, you have to wonder if confirmation, total disclosure, just where this conversation started, would be a good idea. This ranch, as we will learn, has been the site of really strange, incredible things for as long as anyone can remember. And when Bob heard about it, he bought it. And so we're going to hear from him now, and it's sort of like, this is starting at the end, because Bob he doesn't like to give interviews. In fact, this was the first on-camera interview he ever gave, and I think the only on-camera interview he's ever going to give on this particular topic of the ranch. And he's sort of summing up what he and his team were able to accomplish at the ranch in chasing down all these mysteries, something that took 7-8 years. Go ahead and play it.
The performances didn't repeat themselves. You know, each time there would be a performance of a sort, there was always some unique pattern. It was something that was always changed. So we would be prepared that if this type of event happened again, we know what to do. Well, that exact same event never happened again. It would always be something completely different. We were always outguessed. Every time we would come up with some method of observation or calibration, that we were always outguessed as to what was going to, you know, how we were going. And so it became obvious that we obviously weren't the ones in control. We were along for the ride, and that a lot of these exhibitions were exhibitions for gamesmanship or instruction, you know, in that kind of context. The phenomena was playing with us and giving us only a taste here and there of various things, an opportunity to see things that were abnormal, opportunity to cause examinations upon performances of things that were very unique through certain pathological kinds of investigations. And those were opportunities that were very helpful. So in terms of witnessing things, we witnessed things both on camera and in person that we were privileged to witness, that we could have easily not had any opportunities. If the phenomena did not want us to observe anything, then we wouldn't have observed anything.
Here is science and scientists trying to do what they should be doing, going out in the field and evaluating evidence. But in this case, and I mentioned that the subtitle of the book is Science Confronts the Unknown, or the Paranormal, science got its butt kicked, which suggests that maybe science is not the only framework with which we can evaluate some of these events that you and I are all interested in. And I'll give you an example, and it comes from day one at SKINWALKER Ranch. This family moves into this property. It's a 480-acre ranch. It's a beautiful property in northeastern Utah. The family consists, we call them the Gormans in the book. That's not their real name. And we left out the name for at their request. But the real names have been printed in newspaper articles, so anybody who wanted to find them could. Anyway, day one, they buy this ranch. It's going to be their dream property, their dream home. They're there at the property unloading their possessions, and they look out across this green pasture, and there's a big animal lurking up by the tree line. Well, what the heck is that? And it looks like is it a big dog? No, it looks like a wolf, they figured out. And then it starts moving towards them, kind of in a zigzag motion. And they're wondering, God, we didn't even know there were wolves in this area. And then they thought, well, gosh, it's coming right towards us. It must be domesticated. It must be somebody's pet. This thing gets within about 10 feet of the family. It had rained that day. And they remember, when they told this story later, that they could smell the wet dog smell. There's this wolf coming up towards them. They're all sort of on guard a little bit. It is it's gigantic. It in essence it would come up to like the middle of my chest, its back. Huge, heavily muscled, gigantic, powerful. So it's walking in between the family, being kind of docile, not presenting any kind of a threat. The family had just unloaded some calves into this corral that's in the ranch area right near the home. And this wolf sees one of these calves, these unfortunate calves that made the bad judgment to stick its nose out the bars of the corral. The wolf springs like 15 feet in the air, chomps down its powerful jaws on the snout of this calf that had stuck its head through the bars, and starts pulling it. Well, the calf is bleeding, it's screaming, everybody in the family is upset. The dad, the rancher, jumps and grabs a big axe handle and beats this wolf on the back with all of his might. He hits it a couple of times, the wolf doesn't blink. He sends his kid to his truck. He has a powerful handgun a .357 in his glove box. The kid brings it back. He tells his family to stand back. Boom, shoots this wolf point blank. A second time, a third time, it's not moving. Now, by this time, the calf is fading. It looks like it's going to die. The family's freaked out that this wolf is apparently bulletproof. The dad sends his father into the house, comes out with a hunting rifle, a powerful gun that's been used to take down elk and much larger animals than this wolf. And again, he pumps a round point blank into the wolf from this rifle. The wolf doesn't scream, doesn't bleed, doesn't do anything. He does drop the calf and just stands there and looks at the rancher with his rifle. So he shoots him another time. The wolf walks a couple of feet away. He shoots him again, and a big chunk of flesh and fur flies off the wolf and lands in the grass. The wolf calmly turns around and trots slowly back across the pasture from whence it had came. Everybody's looking at each other going, what the hell was this about? They decide you can't have a wolf that big and that powerful with 5 bullet holes in it and just let it roam on your property, so they grabbed another gun and go after it. And they're tracking it across the pasture, and on the other side of this pasture on the ranch is this streamy area, marshy, streamy area. It's got a stream that runs pretty much year-round. There's a lot of mud there and thick brush. While they're going through the thick brush, the father and his son following the tracks. They have no trouble following these tracks because the wolf is so heavy that it was sinking 2-3 inches into the ground. They're following the tracks, and they occasionally get a glimpse of the wolf as they're going through, and then they come to this clearing, and the tracks go right out in the middle of the clearing, and it's like 30 feet on both sides to these trees, and there's water in the other direction, and the tracks get to the middle of this mud bog and just stop, and they're gone. As poof, this thing had just been sucked up or pulled up into the air or disappeared. Father and son are looking at each other. They don't know what to do. They walk back to the house kind of in silence. They find the chunk of flesh and fur that had been expelled by that last shot, and the dad picks it up, and it smells like rotten meat, like it's been out in the sun for a couple of hours. They basically agreed that they weren't going to talk about that anymore, because there they are, they've moved into their new dream home, and this kind of weirdness hit them on the very first day, day one on Skinwalker Ranch. An attempt by legitimate, credentialed scientists to investigate the unknown, something that the science establishment, as you and I know, does its best to avoid. The study that was undertaken was not perfect, but it was remarkable and probably represents the most intense study of an individual paranormal hotspot in the history of the world. The private sector, anyway, we don't know what the military's done. The risks for the research team were very real. Dangerous not only from a professional standpoint, because if the word got out that they're working on weirdness like this, they'd never get another legitimate job, but also it was dangerous physically, because this thing, this entity, this intelligence, whatever it was or is, demonstrated that it exerted control over mind and matter in ways that we simply don't understand. It has the ability to manipulate people, animals, technology, and maybe space and time. It demonstrated an ability to kill, to dismember, and to terrorize. And it seemingly fed on the fear that its actions generated. And it's tempting to go ahead and call it evil. And a lot of people have written to me, it must be evil, it must be Satan or something like that. It is tempting to call it evil because some of the things that it did seem evil, but evil's kind of in the eye of the beholder. My guess is that it's a mistake to assign human motives to something that certainly doesn't seem to be human at all, and that fits the bill here. It's a beautiful ranch, 480 acres, well watered. Right up here on this side is what's known as Skinwalker Ridge. There are 3 homesteads that make up this ranch. That's the first one. That's the house where the ranching family lived. There's another, if we had panned with video-wise, which we don't have, there's another homestead here, and then a third one that make up the whole property. It is a beautiful place. There's only one road leading into it. That becomes significant in a lot of ways. The road leads to a locked gate, and it's got these ominous keep out signs, always has had them there to deter trespassers. It is private property, but ever since the story of Skinwalker Ranch got out, and I guess that's my fault, a lot of curious people have been trespassing and doing all kinds of crazy things there. As mentioned, this 480 acres previously divided into 3 homesteads. The first building, principal residence, where a lot of very, very strange things happened. From the vantage point of the house, you could see these wide pastures and the tree lines, and that distance over there on the right-hand side, that would have been where the wolf came from, if you're wondering. Back down by the first homestead, there's this metal corral. You want to try another shot? That's an observation post that the NIDS guys built. They had dogs inside. This is a shot of the property from Skinwalker Ridge. That's the second and third homesteads where a lot of very strange things happened. That's an old building that left on the property, kind of spooky, especially when you're creeping around in there at night. This is a symbol, a Masonic symbol that was left on the property. It's sort of a little side story, and like I said, this legend has it all, but this town, this part of Utah, was where 2 companies of the Buffalo Soldiers were stationed at the turn of the century, and it turns out that all these guys were Masons. They were Freemasons. So at some point, these Buffalo soldiers who were there to keep the peace and to, after the creation of the Indian reservation, the Ute reservation that surrounds the Skinwalker Ranch, they came on the property at some point, and I think, that's our guess, because this thing was more than 100 years old. That's Colin Kelleher, my co-author on the side over there, and this is Keith Wolverton. He's a deputy sheriff from Montana who had studied a series of mutilations and UFO sightings and Bigfoot incidents in his, is this video on this part, do you know?
I don't think so.
Okay. Okay, that's the ranch house. The first day that you can stop for a second. The first day that ranch house, when they moved in, it was kind of dilapidated. The property had been empty for 7 years when the people bought it. They didn't know much about the legends that surrounded the property. No one had bothered to tell them. When they got into the house, they noticed a couple of strange things. On both doors, where the two entrances to the house, there was these giant stakes with great big heavy chains, as if they'd had guard dogs. Whoever the last residents were, they'd had these big heavy guard dogs there at both doors. They also noticed that there were bolts on both sides of the doors, all inside in the interior of the house, as well as everything was bolted. Everywhere it was bolted and latched down, as if somebody was trying to keep something out, or as if they wanted to keep things sort of bolted down. You can go to the next picture, let's see what it is. That's the spooky keep out sign. I can't believe, it's still there, by the way. Hard to believe somebody hasn't stolen it. That's a neighbor who is cruising down the road from his property going into the ranch. He's been there even longer than the Gorman family, and we interviewed him as well, and we'll call him Mr. Gonzalez, but he has got quite a few stories of his own as well. We'll hold on this for a second, because we'll come back and tell you about a story. That white, this is the corral, and that white metallic trailer is the scene of one of the strangest incidents that happened to the family. I'll jump ahead out of order a little bit because some weird things began happening to the family's animals after a number of other strange activity, paranormal type or poltergeist type activity. They have the animals started disappearing. They lost a total of 14 head. A couple of them were mutilated. A couple of them just disappeared. The tracks would go out into the snow and just poof, it was gone. And so the rancher says to his wife, as they're driving past this corral going to town to do some shopping, we've got these 4 prize bulls. They raise these cattle called Simmental, high-end, hybrid cattle, very expensive. Says if something happens to our 4 bulls, we'll go under. We're done. And these things were 2,000 pounds each, big, heavy, mean, strong animals, and they're all in this corral. The rancher and his wife come back half an hour later from town. All 4 bulls are gone. They're in a panic. They're running around, looking around. Who could have come onto the property? What the heck happened here? Just on a whim, the rancher stands up on something like a box, peers up into the corral, the metal corral, the doors of which are wired shut, and there's all 4 bulls inside. That somebody had crammed them in there. They're all crammed up against each other like this. How you would get 1 bull in there is a mystery. How you got all 4 of them in there boggles the mind. It just can't be done. There's no way to do it. The bulls, the rancher yells to his wife, hey, they're in here. And the bulls had been in like a trance, out of it. And as soon as he yelled, they woke up and started kicking the hell out of the inside of this thing here. Just another little mystery that has yet to be explained. The whole area, the Uinta Basin, has been the site of strange stuff forever. There were Spanish explorers, Father Escalante, who came through there in the late 1700s. They had what sounds like a UFO flying over their campfire. Native Americans have been there for hundreds of years. They have reported the same kinds of things, what we would call UFOs, what we would call Bigfoot, Sasquatch, they call skinwalkers. And I'm not going to go into a whole big explanation about what skinwalkers are or Native American beliefs, but it turns out that in this whole vast Uinta Basin, people, 80–90% of the people who lived there had seen UFOs.
poltergeist, paranormal stuff. A guy named Dr. Frank Salisbury wrote a book about it called The Utah UFO Display. And the word display, I think, is kind of key because it kind of goes back to what Bob Bigelow told us about a performance. Dr. Salisbury, a university professor, sort of reached the same conclusion. That what has been happening for a very long time in the Uinta Basin is a display for our benefit. They show us glimpses when they want to show us glimpses. They let us see bits and pieces, but it's always by their rules. We only get to see what they decide we're allowed to see. This book that Dr. Salisbury wrote was based on about 400 of the best UFO cases that had been compiled by a guy named Junior Hicks. And those cases of his that were very well documented formed the basis of that book. We got to meet Junior Hicks and talk to him about some of the things he had seen over the years. And as we're doing it, he mentioned that in all the vast Uinta Basin, which seemed to be a UFO paranormal hotspot for as long as anyone could remember, there was one spot in particular that seemed to be the epicenter of the activity, and that was this ranch. And he called it Skinwalker Ranch. He said it was, the name came because it is in the path of the Skinwalker, according to the Utes. And I remember getting just sort of a little chill on my arm when he told me about it. Skinwalker, in case you don't know, in Native American lore, is a shapeshifter, a sorcerer, an evil witch. Can control men's minds and make them do all kinds of things. It assumes the shape of animals, puts on the skins, and then it has the power of those animals. And although we might find it quaint or stick it in a religious category, it's very serious stuff to Native Americans. And in fact, in trying to do research for this book, it was pretty much impossible to find anyone who was willing to talk about it. And I'm serious about it, even at universities and things of that sort. Trying to get anyone to talk about it was very, very difficult because they figure that if you mention a skinwalker, it comes for you. If it gets your attention, you're going to regret it. The Gorman family, of course, had no way of knowing all this stuff before they moved in. I'm not sure they would have paid the same price for the property if they had known about it, or whether they would have believed it, even if someone had warned them. In 1994, they bought the property. They knew little about its history, except that it had been vacant for all those years. One thing they noticed, as I mentioned, is all the stakes and the bolts. And then there's a whole lot of spectacular stuff that happened that we'll get to in a moment. The stuff that spooks me, that puts the goosebumps on my arms, are the little things that started happening. What we might equate with like poltergeist type activity. An extensive menu of just deeply disturbing things that would happen on the property, some of them outright dangerous, but it's the little ones that really got spooky. And I'll give you some examples. Inanimate objects showing up in odd places. The frying pan being in the freezer and the things showing up in a microwave. The dad is out in the pasture and he's got a fence post digger, a heavy tool. He's digging holes to put fence posts in. He stops, it's leaning against him, or leans against it, takes a swig of water, wipes his brow, turns around, it's gone. And they don't find it for 3 weeks. It was 75 feet up in a tree. Mom goes to town. She goes shopping for groceries, and it's a ranch family, so they get a lot of food. She unloads all the stuff, puts it in the cupboards, goes to the bathroom, comes back out, all the food's back in the bags. Or she goes to the bath, she takes a shower every morning. She goes in, she puts a towel and a hairbrush on the cabinet. She locks the door, takes a shower, gets out, the door's still locked, cabinet, hairbrush are gone. Stuff like that. They started seeing shapes, odd shadows, things of that sort, all around the property. They'd hear noises, they'd hear heavy footsteps outside their bedroom door in the middle of the night, get up and there's nothing there. They started seeing these large, dark humanoid figures that would appear at their windows and then later at the foot of their beds. Started hearing these disembodied voices, the speaking in a language they'd never heard. The husband and wife, the Gormans, are out in their yard one night. They tell the story. They hear these voices. It sounds like it's like 10 feet above their heads, speaking in something that's like Russian or Slavic or some language they'd never heard. And they yelled at them. Hey, we can hear you, kind of a thing. And these voices were quiet for a second, and then they started sort of like mocking them. making fun of them. And it became sort of a whole series of mind games. Everywhere the family was, they felt they were being watched. Everything they did, they felt that somebody was anticipating what they were going to do, that somebody could read their minds. Frequently, they heard these loud mechanical noises underground, almost like there was an underground railroad or a subterranean steel mill or something, just shaking the ground at all hours of the night. Their neighbors would hear it as well, and had been hearing it for years. They saw a lot of weird animals, the wolf being one of them. The wife also had her own encounter with this horse-sized wolf out at the front gate. She came home one night, unlocked it, and there it was. Its back was higher than the top of her car. And it was accompanied not by another wolf, but this gigantic dog, a gigantic black dog with a head that was too small for its body. Just weird stuff. They started seeing these birds, exotic birds, red tropical birds that had never been seen in the area before. Like they belonged in the Amazon rainforest or something. Or maybe on a stopover point to some other place. Here's a weird one. One afternoon they're coming home. They see that their horses are jumping around in the corral, are very upset, and the rancher pulls up and runs out thinking that a wolf or something or a dog is attacking the horses, and he sees this creature. It's like almost like a hyena. It's heavily muscled, very low to the ground. Maybe 200 pounds, and it's slashing. It's got these big long claws slashing at the legs of these horses, which are just in terror. Rancher screams at it. And, the other thing it had was this great big bushy tail like a fox. Doesn't match any animal this guy had ever seen before. So he goes yelling at it and running in the direction. This thing jumps out of the corral and runs up onto Skinwalker Ridge, and then poof, I mean literally disappears right before his eyes. By the way, the wolf, the wolf that they had seen, the bulletproof wolf, later after the NID scientists came to the property and started interviewing them about all the things they had seen, they gave them sort of like a canine lineup, like pick out the suspect who did this thing. And they went through and looked at all these pictures of wolves and drawings of wolves. And the wolf that they found that most closely resembled the bulletproof wolf was something called a dire wolf. That's a species that has been extinct for 10,000 years. Lots of strange animals that would just show up. So after bulletproof wolves and assorted animals and mystery voices and strange lights and poltergeist type events, where does it go? Well, cue the UFOs. They started seeing them. First it was little balls of light, white light, zipping in and out of the trees. Then they started seeing these red things that would absolutely terrorize their animals. That would drive the cattle, sometimes literally, off a cliff. Then they started seeing these things that I call the blue meanies. They're like, they were about the size of a softball, and the exterior looks like it's made out of glass. And inside is this blue, boiling, bubbling liquid. And these things would literally inspire so much fear that they felt like falling to their knees. I mean, they were afraid of all kinds of stuff, but eventually they got used to some of these things. But these things, when they showed up, I mean, fear beyond anything that's rational, fear completely out of their mind. And it seemed like these things fed on it, that they drew energy from it, that they just messed with their heads because it gave them, I don't know, a sense of power, or maybe literally gave them power. They saw a lot of flying discs. They saw sombrero-shaped objects that flew right into Skinwalker Ridge. They saw all kinds of lights, day and night. They saw something that looked like an F-117 stealth fighter. It had Christmas lights like all around it, and it would pop up on the property at night and shine a spotlight as if it was looking for things. At the same time that they sometimes would see hear these underground noises, like the Underground Railroad, beams of light would light up the whole pasture. Sometimes they'd come from out of the sky. Sometimes it looked like they came from out of the ground. Well, you can imagine that the families get a little upset with this whole litany of activity, trying to figure out what the heck was going on. They saw these things that they called orange orbs that looked like like a sun or like a moon. Through those things, it's like you look into another sky, that there's a sky on the other side that is not day as it is here, it's nighttime. And on occasion, things would fly in and out of these orbs as if they're coming from some other reality into ours or leaving ours and going back to theirs. And I'm not making this up, and neither was he. The objects that they were seeing, they're not fireflies, they're not strobe lights, they're not reflections from airplanes, they're not swamp gas. None of those kinds of explanations work. You know, we don't have, and the military doesn't have, as far as we know, any kind of blue orbs that can induce emotional states or terror in people, or that have no propulsion system other than some sort of a liquid. So the mystery continued to grow. Tom Gorman made a discovery in the third homestead. If you want to let some pictures roll, it was scoop marks. 20, 30 scoop marks, hundreds of pounds of dirt just dug out of his property, kind of in a cookie cutter pattern. How does somebody get in there with a backhoe or heavy equipment and take that much dirt without him hearing it? It's quiet out there at night. There's only one way in and one way out. It's pretty much impossible to do it, but there they are, and even years later you could still see the impressions that were left. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Native American police had told us this thing, that they had seen this coming around a bend. They're on patrol duty in the area around the ranch. They come down this dirt road one night, and they see two figures, humanoid-looking figures, standing up with their backs to the road, and looked like they were smoking cigarettes. They had trench coats on, smoking cigarettes, standing out on the road. These guys figure, what are these fellas up to? So they're pulling up, and they go shining their lights on the guys, and they turn around, and they were dogs. I know. They're dogs smoking cigarettes. I know what you're thinking. Why weren't they playing poker too, or something like that? But the guys look at each other. They turn back around. The dogs, the cigarette-smoking dogs, are gone. They get out of their vehicles, pull their guns, go over and look on the ground. There's the cigarettes, but the dogs, the trench coats, that's gone. Now, we had to think about whether we were going to tell that story or not, because it is just patently ridiculous. But since the book has come out, we've actually heard 3 different other accounts of cigarette-smoking dogs wearing trench coats. So I don't know what force is playing that particular game on us, but it's pretty darn weird. There were sightings of what the Native Americans would call Sasquatch. These things 7.5 feet tall, all over the property. Some of them were chased by the police down in that property, dark, running across the pastures. There was some other kind of a large animal that was seen many times all over the place. Well, actually not seen, because it was invisible. You'd watch, you could see it move through the cattle. The animals would move, scared, as if somebody just brushed them aside. On occasion, this thing would walk through water, bodies of water that are on the property, and you could see the water being displaced. It was big. It was because a lot of water was moving. You could hear it, but you couldn't see it. There was this musk odor that was often associated with paranormal activity. When something strange was going to happen, they'd smell this very powerful sulfuric smell before it happened. There were circular impressions left on the grass, much like crop circles. 3 of them, each were 8 feet in diameter, arranged sort of in a triangular pattern. All of this was really taking its toll on the family, as you might imagine. The kids' grades were going down. The mom lost her job at a bank in town. None of them were sleeping much. And then things got worse because bad things started happening to the animals. Very serious things. You know, they live on a ranch. They've got a lot of animals. Big, sturdy, hunting country dogs that aren't afraid of anything. They refused to come out of their house for days at a time. They were scared about something. Several of these dogs just disappeared altogether. There was one night when 8 of their cats disappeared. I'll tell you about the cattle thing in a moment, but I'm going to jump ahead and tell you what happened to the 3 best hunting dogs, and maybe you've heard this story before. The rancher is on the phone to somebody I know at the time this happened. These 3 big dogs are chasing one of the blue meanies, and it's staying just outside the reach of their snapping jaws. And it's leading them across this pasture back toward where that wolf had originally been seen. And so the ranchers, hey, something's going on here, I'm gonna have to get off the phone. And right about that point, the dogs went out of sight and went into the brush line, and then he heard these screams or shrieks. And he's a very powerful, strong man, a world-class hunter. He's been in the country all his life. He was afraid to go out there. He went out there the next morning, and there were 3 greasy spots on the ground, and that was all left of his dog. Something just zapped him. Well, that was it. That was it. They were going to get the heck out of there, and made the decision at that point, but they just didn't know at that point how they were going to do it. Let me tell you about the cattle. I told you that they lost 14 head. I told you about the bull incident into the trailer. The NIDS team, that you'll be hearing about more in a couple of minutes, was really concentrated on cattle mutilation cases. They studied them all over the country, all over North America, and into Canada. When one of these cases would happen, they'd jump on it, get on a plane, go up there and see if they could get enough evidence before it was destroyed by the elements. So they had more than a few opportunities at the SKINWALKER Ranch. This was after the team moved in, this incident happened, and I'm going to play, it's the other disc.
When a family's entire livelihood depends on the well-being of its livestock, the loss of even a single animal is a serious matter. For the Gormans, the stakes were even higher. Their herd of 80 cattle consisted of high-end Simmental stock, each the product of Tom Gorman's expertise at artificial insemination. The loss of 14 valuable cows in a matter of months was devastating to the family's finances, but took a psychological toll as well. Across the country, dating back to the late 60s, hundreds of other ranchers in at least 15 other states experienced the same sense of frustration and helplessness upon discovering the grim evidence left behind by the mystery surgeons. At the Gorman Ranch, as elsewhere, the grisly handiwork was primarily carried out under the cover of darkness or during violent storms. The carved carcasses were mostly found hours or days later, during daylight. Even in sunlight, the discovery of an animal sliced up so precisely was chilling and deeply disturbing. And then it got worse. On March 10, 1997, Tom Gorman and his wife walked out of their home and into the pasture, planning to tag the ears of several calves that had been born in the preceding days. It was a bright, clear morning. Snow was on the ground. 50 yards from their house, they found the first calf.
As they were with their dog, the two of them tagged and weighed this animal. They checked it at, I believe it was 84 pounds or 87 pounds. And they left the animal there with its mother. With the mother. Everything seemed to be fine, although they did detect an odor in the air around this area. They detected a strong musk smell. They took note of it, and then they headed west. And they went about 300 yards west beyond, the dog run was not there at the time, but about 300 yards beyond, towards where that incline is, and they were tagging a second animal.
Only 30 to 40 minutes had passed. The Gormans had an unobstructed view of everything in the field, but didn't see or hear anything unusual until their dog focused its attention back toward the house and the first calf.
The dog with them down here at this stage began to act really strangely. It started growling, the hair on the back of its neck went up, and it started facing back towards here, growling and snarling, and then it just took off west, away from this spot. It just took off. It was never seen again.
The Gormans were curious and walked back across the field.
First thing they saw was the mother of the animal was running back and forth, kind of in a sort of half circle from about this area to the fence line, just running back and forth, and it was limping. I mean, it was dragging its foot, it was limping. They met the animal and they noticed that it was just totally out of breath, it was panting, it was obviously in deep stress, and it was dragging one leg.
And then they noticed the calf, or what was left of it.
Spread-eagled on the ground, just about here. With it was lying with all four limbs just spread on the ground. All of its internal body cavity was gone. It was completely, pretty well, all of its muscle was gone from the torso. The legs were still intact, but one of the ears was also gone. So they called NIDS.
The rancher placed a call to the NIDS investigators who'd returned to Las Vegas for a rare weekend off. Within a few hours, a four-man team, including a veterinarian, was on the scene.
Necropsy started, and the first thing that the veterinarian noticed during the necropsy was that the ear of the animal had been sliced off with a very sharp instrument, possibly a scalpel, and the ear had contained a very large plastic yellow tag, like an ear tag that they had just put on, and it was gone. So the necropsy proceeded. About 10 feet away from the animal, there was a femur. One of the femurs had been forcibly ripped out of a ball and socket joint, which is extremely difficult to do, I mean, in terms of strength. It looked initially, you know, superficially like a massive predator had just lain waste to this animal, removed, you know, 60 pounds of meat in 45 minutes, which we don't know of any predator that could have done that.
And how could a predator inflict such carnage without being seen or heard by the rancher, his wife, or his dog, who were a few hundred yards away in the same field on what was a quiet Sunday morning? No four-legged predator known to science could do it. The team gathered tissue and bone samples, which were sent to 3 independent pathology labs. The results arrived later, but confirmed what seemed obvious in the pasture that day. The calf had been carved up by someone wielding sharp, metallic instruments. A heavy machete-like object had slammed into the bones. A smaller scalpel-like knife had sliced the hide and muscle.
Closer inspection revealed that it was definitely sharp instruments used. There was no sign of blood. There was no sign of entrails around. It was perfectly clean. Not a drop of blood on the grass. We went even as far as doing an experiment by pouring blood on the grass to see how fast it would seep through. Videotaped the grass and showed, you know, even 2 days later you could still see the stain on the grass. So there was no blood whatsoever, not a single drop, either underneath the animal, on the animal, or on the grass. It was just completely clean.
A professional tracker was brought in. He scoured every inch of ground in and around the field, looking for tracks, human, animal, or vehicle. Nothing. Eventually, the investigators reached an unsettling conclusion.
The bottom line is this animal must have been killed elsewhere because there was no blood. There was no blood on the scene, and then the animal must have been brought back, laid down carefully, almost, you know, really almost ritually on the spot where it had been tagged.
So the dogs are spooked, all the animals are spooked, the people are spooked. This obviously there's something big that had just eaten 75 pounds or 60 pounds of meat. What Colin didn't say in that soundbite is, in addition to them finding evidence of a scalpel-like instrument and a heavy machete instrument, there were teeth marks that something had chewed on that calf. He hears a noise, he hears his cattle out, it's at nighttime, and he's patrolling around because he doesn't want to lose any more. He's got a powerful gun with him in his truck. The NIDS guys hear him making a noise, tearing out across the pasture, so they jump in their vehicle and they go after him, and they bring in a video camera, and then they hear him jump out of his truck. Boom, I got it. The story was, as he explained what he had, and then did more shots. He had pulled up to this tree and had seen these two creatures. One is a big, round, almost looks like a bear. It's at the bottom of this tree. And the other one is up in a tree. Now, he can't see the shape of that creature in the tree, but he knows it's big because its eyes were like this. Big, green, reptilian eyes, that big, sitting up in the tree, glaring at him. And he shot at that, too. As soon as he shot the thing at the bottom, which is the first thing that he hit, he says, I hit it. It goes poof, it's gone. He shoots the thing in the eyes in the tree, the second thing, and it fell out. Now there was snow on the ground. There was still snow at the time, and the NIDS guys come up behind Tom Gorman, rushing to catch him because he goes off into the brush, but this thing fell down, and one print is in the snow at the bottom of that tree. And they analyzed it later, and it's tough to do because it is snow. They couldn't make a cast of it, but it was like a raptor, like a dinosaur. That's the only thing, the only kind of comparison they could make. And crazy as it sounds, after shooting it out of the tree, they go into the bushes looking for it. Didn't find it, no blood. They brought in the same guy who was the tracker, went looking for it, never found it. But just sort of adding to the litany. Now the neighbor, you saw the picture of the neighbor who was driving down the road there, Mr. Gonzalez, had his own mutilation incidents, so it's not just the Gorman family making this stuff up. One of the most unusual ones was he had a couple of cows in a barbed wire fenced area. They can't get out. I don't know why he was keeping them there, but he looks out his window, and damn if they aren't out. One of them is caught under the barbed wire. The other one is out in the field laying down. He goes out there and sees it, and its two front legs are broken. And he can't figure out for the life of him how it got out of the enclosure and what had happened to its legs. So he goes back in the house. He's going to get a gun and a blanket to comfort didn't know whether to comfort the cow, it was in agony, or to shoot it and put it out of its misery. Comes right back outside, cow's gone. It's gone. Scratching his head, goes back in the house trying to figure out what the heck had happened. He has a sandwich. It's an hour later. He looks out his window, and to his amazement, the cow's back. He goes running outside. Now, instead of 2 broken legs, it has 4 broken legs. It is as if it had been dropped from the sky twice. There were a lot of those kinds of incidents, both to the Gormans and to their neighbors. And that is sort of why NIDS got involved. And I'll make this short because I know you're going to have questions on this and other topics. But NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science, heard about this because Tom Gorman got fed up. He thought it was the military pulling tricks, that somehow the military wanted his land and they're playing mind games with him. So he went to a newspaper reporter and he told the reporter about it, thinking if I get enough publicity, maybe they'll leave me alone. Well, what happened instead was Bob Bigelow heard about it. He flies down to meet with Gorman. By the time that the Bigelow and the NIDS people arrived on the property, the Gorman family, the 4 members, were all sleeping in the same room every night on the floor for safety. They were a wreck. They had some instances that sort of coincide with what we would describe as alien abduction experiences, scars and missing times and things like that. I mean, they were a wreck. So Bigelow, in a sense, was sort of a savior to him. He says, hey, can I buy the ranch? Yeah, you bet you could buy this ranch. And then he talked Tom Gorman into what would seem impossible, and that is staying on. The family were to move to another property 20 miles away, but Tom Gorman, who was a proud man, stubborn, didn't want to be run off his land, was determined to get to the bottom of it. And many a night he would be out there on his property with a gun trying to outwit whatever the heck this intelligence was. And eventually, he sort of developed sort of a strategy for stalking it and felt that at times he could avoid it. Even though other times it seemed to know exactly what he was going to do, what he was thinking, what he was planning. That's also the experience that the NIDS guys had. They arrive on the property, they come in with sort of guns blazing. There was a lot of debate among the Science Advisory Board about what kind of an approach to take with such a unique property and a unique position. They opted to go high tech, so they put cameras all over the property and sensors, and they installed a trailer with all kinds of infrared gear and other things. They had a 24-hour-a-day presence on the property, and they did what scientists should do. I mean, basic science. And again, as with the Gormans, this entity, this intelligence, played with them. It's like it anticipated their moves. You put some cameras so it's going to watch here, you have an event over there. You put it over there, it happens over there. They developed almost tried to develop a communication system with the thing and felt that at one point that they were close to it. But it didn't happen. And eventually, they started adopting the techniques that Tom Gorman had used, and they're stalking it. And whatever this intelligence was, it didn't like being hunted. It liked being the hunter. And it started appearing less and less and less. And it sort of punctuated its departure in a very distinct way. You saw the picture of the telephone pole with the cameras on top. Anyway, they've got 3 of these cameras on poles looking at different parts of the ranch property. And one night they noticed that one of the cameras went out completely. And they go out to investigate, and something had gone up the pole and ripped the guts out of this camera. And not just ripped the wires out, just destroyed it, but they had this thick tape all the way down the telephone pole. The tape had been baked in the sun, in the hot summer sun out there. Yeah, that's the camera setup. And you see the tape. So they had ripped the tape off. That was gone. The tubing that protects the wires that go up the top, that was gone. And they thought, aha, you know what? We've got the other camera that has a vision that should be able to see what happened there. We'll just back time it. We'll take a look and see what it was or who went up there and destroyed this camera. They rolled the tape back. They can't see anything. There's nothing there. The camera is not crisp enough to see the wires flying or anything, but there's nothing there. They take the videotape back to Las Vegas and later could see a tiny little, almost like a firefly or something flying around it, but this was no firefly. It was as if this thing said, we don't want your cameras here anymore, and we don't want you here anymore. And eventually the level of activity sort of dropped off to the point where there wasn't enough for these guys to be there to study. It flares up to this day, now and then, not only around the ranch, but throughout the Uinta Basin. But this is sort of a mystery we're not going to solve anytime soon. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I mean, it seems like it was a portal of some sort, or a dimensional door, or things were coming in from somewhere else. You know, in preparation for the book, we analyzed a variety of different possibilities of what it could be. We ruled out hoaxes because the family didn't create this story. It had been there since long before they lived in the area, since before they were born. They didn't instill the story in their neighbors. Everybody in the whole region had seen these kinds of weird things. They didn't destroy their own animals. They didn't hoax the NIDS guys who saw this stuff with their own eyes. Plus, they were trustworthy people. They were solid, salt of the earth kind of people.
Tell a little bit about, there was one encounter in the book, there's one story about a sort of like an RV UFO. It's out in the field. Can you tell that story? That's
Sure.
kind of strange.
This was the first UFO type object that the Gorman family saw. The father and son are out at dusk on the property finishing up their day's work. And like I said, there's only one way to get into the property, and it's a locked gate, it has to go by the house. And they see what that looks like headlights down in the third homestead, thinking, you know, that kind of looks like an RV. How the hell did this RV get past us? It must be stuck down there. Let's go help them. So they start walking down towards the stuck RV in the third homestead, and the lights start coming toward them. Oh, it must not be stuck anymore. And then the lights are coming towards them, and then the lights start rising, and then the lights went straight up in the sky and disappeared. And it was shaped like a great big Winnebago, but this was no Winnebago you can buy down at the corner car lot. That was their first UFO.